Welcome to the last installment of World War Z in Public Health. It is hard to believe that we've been doing this for a month. I can't get over how quickly time flies. So this is the fourth and final segment of looking at how the movie World War Z could be applied to real-life public health scenarios for both professionals and lay people. When this segment is complete, I will be choosing another Hollywood example to give and to be a very similar format. And I'm looking at starting this back up in a couple of weeks. If you guys have any suggestions or an angle you like to go at, please don't forget to suggest. Remember, right down here, down there. Yeah, you know, I really wanted the Disease Forensics Facebook page, as well as this segment itself, to really be part of a discussion of forum. You know, that was my intention. You know, I can find tons of stuff on the web. I can find, you know, lots of wonderful websites. I can find lots of great information, but there's not enough forum. You know, there's not really enough discussion taking place, and I really was hoping to create an online atmosphere through disease forensics to really encourage conversation about community health, public health, about disease, you know, for your pets, disease with people, environmental, because remember our focus is One Health, which includes environmental aspects too. So I really am hoping you guys will comment, share. You have questions, if there's something I can't answer, I will point you in a direction that can get you an answer, okay? So, fourth and final segment. We started with chapter 13, which is at an hour and 22-minute mark. And we are picking up with Jerry and Sagan at the WHO, or WHO, the World Health Organization facility in Wales. We know that Jerry's family is not on the carrier ship any longer because she is non-essential personnel. They thought that when the plane went down, Jerry died. So they transported her and her children along with the child now that they're taking care of that was part of what happened at the high-rise apartment in New Jersey. And they are now in a refugee camp in Nova Scotia. Okay, so at the WHO facility, Jerry's proven who he is. The doctors there have talked to his, not just to him, but to the UN. Talked to Thierry, which is the secretary of the UN. And I have to say that part was definitely Hollywood-esque. You would never be able to walk up to a facility like that and just knock on the door and essentially get in. I don't care how wounded you look or what was going on. And there's a good reason for that. Because the one thing that's definitely realistic is a facility like that has a lot of pathogens in it. And the last thing you want is someone being able to walk out with something. Or pick up something for that matter too. So you would never be able just to get up and walk in there. So that part was kind of Hollywood-esque. I don't know, maybe if there was a world epidemic like that, maybe it would be different. A pandemic, maybe it would be different. But going by today's standards, that part was definitely Hollywood-esque. So Jerry's starting to share this theory with them. Okay, this theory. And the theory is that the virus needs a healthy host, which makes sense. You know, something alive, this virus, right, cannot reproduce, cannot replicate in something that's not living. So that part definitely is not far-fetched. So what he asks and comments is he wants to use a disease. He says the worst disease, deadly pathogen with a high mortality rate, but is curable. That's specifically what he says, right? So they're looking like, huh? You know, oh, nice try. We thought about that. It's not going to work. And the doctors bring up the fact of, well, it's not going to work because you can't inject it into something that's not alive. There's no circulatory system. So, you know, we can't take something that would be deadly for us and inject it into these zombies, and it's not going to work. They're not technically alive. But he said no. He's not looking for a cure. He's looking for camouflage, which we are going to use that later in our discussion. Very, very important, okay? It's not a cure, it's camouflage. And the female doctor, the World Health Organization female doctor, makes a comment saying there is natural precedent for this, okay? So I found two papers that were really interesting that talked about using camouflage on this micro level, okay, like kind of on the same line what Jerry's talking about. So one of them is this one by, it was in Contagion Live Infectious Disease Today. It was printed on February 5th of this year, 2018. And it says, antibiotic first discovered decades ago may stop resistant superbugs. Okay, so I'll put it up there so that you can see it here. So this is the article. And they're talking about a new way to use antibiotics. But the only part that I'm pulling out of it is about gram-negative bacteria, and that's the only part I'm pulling out that I'm going to read to you. It says, gram-negative bacteria are harder to kill as disease organisms because they have an extra membrane to penetrate that is often hidden by a capsule or slime layer, which acts as camouflage, to camouflage them from drugs and our immune system. So this is not something that we haven't heard of in real life. I would love to know more about behind the scenes movie, because some of these things I thought there had to be a doctor on site, because it is very close, it's very close to reality. So, here's gram-negative bacteria that has this protective covering that acts as camouflage that the immune system doesn't recognize it, okay? So then we also have, this is sleeping sickness, parasites, camouflage himself with sugar. And this was from July 10th of this year, July 10th of 2018. It was in Cell and Microbiology. So there's the article. And as I always do too, guys, I will post links so that you can find these articles for yourself. So this was in regards to trypanosomiasis, which is African sleeping sickness. And it says it's like putting, I'm again reading a part of this, it's like putting on a new coat. It says Nina Papsilavu. I'm sorry, Nina, if I said your name wrong, which I'm sure I did. Immunologist at the German Cancer Research Center, or DKFZ. The trypanosomes masked in this way are no longer recognizable by the antibodies. They multiply rapidly, and the infection, which the immune system has initially kept in check, flares up again violently. So we have this bug. It's actually a parasite, okay, that is able to mask itself. Excuse me. So sleeping sickness parasites camouflage themselves with sugar, and it has to do with protective coating, basically, of sugar or form of sugar on the outside of the cell, excuse me, which makes it hard for antibodies to react to this this parasite. It's actually a parasite. So this is not unusual. We have examples of things that they definitely camouflage. So that's not far-fetched, and for her to see that, the WHO doctor, that there's a natural precedent, yeah, that is actually true. So this is actually, Jerry's theory is feasible, and they acknowledge that. Which, I'll tell you what made me think of this particular part is when Jurgen in Israel had said, all you can do is find a way to hide. That's exactly, you're talking about camouflage, right? You're hiding. So it's kind of interesting how that particular comment is being used in a different capacity, because it's not meant as in to hide, right? But you're hiding something, like you're hiding a cure, okay? So we find out while he's there that a WHO or WHO vaccinologist became infected. He transmitted the disease through samples, okay? Which I had mentioned way back, I think it was in the first segment, that about the movie, like, not Contagion, Outbreak, excuse me, movie Outbreak with Dustin Hoffman, that was one way they showed the lab technician picking it up, right? Was the centrifuge tube, this tube was being centrifuged, it broke open, and the guy became infected. So here we have at a facility, a WHO facility, that it's a vaccinologist that became infected while handling samples. And they had it actually on film in the movie. And we also find out that Jerry comments about a way that they look different. They don't look the same. And he said, I never seen them move like this. I've never seen them. What are they doing? And they comment and say they're dormant. They're awaiting stimulant. So we're seeing a different side of these zombies or creatures too. We're seeing this kind of unique, that Jerry hasn't seen. He's been all over the world looking at them, and it's a different way that they're acting. Okay? Jerry, after a lot of theatrics, and boy, this is another moment that you're kind of sitting on the edge of your seat, and your pulse is quickening, and you're like, oh boy, is he going to make it? You know, what's going to happen here? So we get through all the theatrics. Jerry makes it to an area of the facility that has these deadly pathogens. He ends up getting trapped, and he decides the only way he can handle it now is he's going to, because he's trapped by one of these Zax, zombies, ghouls, depending on the book or the movie. He ends up getting trapped in the room. He decides he's going to try out his theory on himself. Okay, so he injects himself with a pathogen, waits, and that was the only part about the movie. To be honest, I wish they would have tweaked a little bit more. Was they would have given some more definitive way of showing how long he waited, because I don't know, because I'm making a constant analysis between real life and the movie. Maybe that's why that stuck with me. But injects himself, and then he goes to test it by walking by these zombies to see what happens. And come to find out, yep, they walk right by him. Okay? So he believes he's found a way to basically walk among them. Right? To walk among them. So that would give them the ability, they're able to walk among them, that then they can find a way to wipe them out. And we see at the end of the movie where they're showing all the different ways, depending on the area of the world, all these different ways that they're getting rid of. Some were setting fires, trapping them in certain areas, so you see all the ways that they were able to do that. At the end of the movie, we still don't know how it started. We don't have the slightest idea what happened. And what they end up injecting them with is a hybridized meningitis strain with components of smallpox and H1N1. So H1N1 is an influenza or flu strain. So it's a hybrid, so it's a mixture of meningitis, smallpox, and H1N1. And now I'll tell you, while I was watching that and hearing that, I figured it must have been certain aspects of it. If this was a real situation, like what of those components would work well? Well, the flu virus tends to mutate quickly. We also look at, in the past, we've looked at vaccines where family units could inadvertently give them to each other, thereby creating, like inoculating in an environment. Okay, we've done it with vaccines in the past, and that's why I thought with H1N1, it may be a situation you could give it to each other. And with having a part of smallpox, smallpox is very easily contagious and transmitted between. I thought maybe it was a component of that. And meningitis because of the area of brain, right? Because remember, this is a neurological virus. So it made sense about the fact of it being meningitis. So I thought that was really interesting of those particular 3 strains. And this allows the invisible to be to the infected. They're invisible to the infected, and they're able to wipe them out. So that's the movie in a nutshell. We've been through every chapter, and of course I do want to make a comparison in here to the book, because that's what this is based on. This whole movie is based on a Max Brooks book, World War Z. I definitely highly recommend you to read it, because this is one of those situations where the book really is very little like the movie. There's very little that I can make a definitive distinction, or definitive connection, between the two. I've done it off and on with reading passages, but the format's totally different. And I've said this off and on throughout these segments, but the movie is present tense. It's happening. This outbreak's happening, and what do? The book is past tense. It's already happened, and he's talking to people that were part of it. and they're rebuilding civilization. So it's totally a different angle. I'm going to read, though, one part out of here that is it's towards the end. It's in the last few pages of the book. There's 342 pages, and this is 334. And so this is, if you guys remember me telling you, he's interviewing different people in different areas of the world about their experiences with dealing with this disease, okay, and in whatever form they were in. So he's interviewing someone in Troy, Montana, in the U.S., and this is Mrs. Miller. It says, Mrs. Miller and I stand on the back deck above the children playing in the central courtyard. So he's interviewing this woman named Mrs. Miller, okay? And this is what she has to say. And I thought this is a really good way to end. Out of everything that we covered, this is the best way to end it. And of course, it's with Max Brooks' book, the movie's based on. So why not a better way here? You can blame the politicians, the businessmen, the generals, the machine, but really, if you're looking to blame someone, blame me. I'm the American system. I'm the machine. That's the price of living in a democracy. We all gotta take the rap. I can see why it took so long for China to finally embrace it. And why Russia just said, and there's a derogatory, okay, and went back to whatever they call their system now. Nice to be able to say, hey, don't look at me. It's not my fault. Well, it is. It is my fault. And it's the fault of everyone of my generation. And she looks down at her children. And she continues. And she states, I wonder what future generations will say about us. My grandparents suffered through the Depression, World War II, then came home to build the greatest middle class in human history. Lord knows they weren't perfect, but they sure came closest to the American dream. Then my parents' generation came along and messed it. I'm not quoting it directly, but messed it all up. The baby boomers, the me generation, and then you got us. Yeah, we stopped the zombie menace, but we're the ones who let it become a menace in the first place. At least we're cleaning up our own mess, and maybe that's the best epitaph to hope for. Generation Z. They cleaned up their own mess. And I thought, what a good way, wonderful way to end this, because that's exactly what I'm hoping that this forum is going to do. We all have a vital part in keeping our community safe. And I've said that more times than I could possibly count as I've been doing this. I've put it in my postings that, of what you can do with the information I'm posting. Here's something else. Or maybe it's in the title itself of the article I'm posting on disease forensics. But we all have a stake or piece in the puzzle. That, I believe, is pretty realistic. We really can't, when it comes to controlling disease, there is no way to point our finger at any one person or any one organization or any one government body and say, if there's a disease that escalates or happens or an outbreak that occurs, it's your fault. Because sometimes it can be that we've seen signs and we look the other way. Sometimes it can be that we ignored the things we were supposed to be doing to head off disease to begin with. That's my hope, that we acknowledge those parts, that we talk about it, and we try to figure out ways to keep our communities and our niches as healthy as possible. Okay? So that concludes that part. We've now finished the movie World War Z. I hope that you enjoyed that part. I have. I've really enjoyed doing this. So we're going to continue on with looking at the symptoms that we discovered, like we have done, the same format. We're going to talk about 3 issues that came out of this segment, and then we're going to end with a different way, and it has to do with this diagram here that's behind me. We're going to go over that at the very end. So let's move on to our symptoms that we've so far covered from each unit, just like how we've done before. So with chapters 1 to 4, we figured out the symptoms are aggressive, cannibalism, highly focused on their next meal, right? We found out that Jerry developed and realized this 12-second, what I refer to as a 12-second rule, that from the time someone is bitten to the time that they are infected and react, and show they're infected, is 12 seconds, okay? We talked about who's not affected or infected, so who was affected, who are the infected people going after, and who are they showing no interest at all in? And we see they're pretty much going after everybody. But when he was in New Jersey, we saw like a herd of them go running past an elderly homeless gentleman who did not look well. Okay, so that's a first glimpse of what are they avoiding, right? You cannot acquire this disease through ingestion or fomites. So Jerry gets some of the blood from one of the zombies in his mouth and does not transmit the disease, and no one's getting it from surfaces, countertops, railings, nothing like that. So they can't get it off fomites or inanimate objects. Okay, so then we figured out on chapters 5 through 8, we looked at Dr. Fosbach's quote, which was really important. Seeing crumbs for the clues that they are, because that really is the epitome of epidemiology, of being able to discern something that is nothing versus this is the stepping stone, or this is exactly what we're looking for to point us in a direction of what we're dealing with. Okay, so we find out it's rapidly spreading. Theory says it's spread to all corners of the globe, and he points his finger at airline travel. That is the carrier, the way that it was able to transmit so quickly. Okay, because you're moving people quickly from one area of the globe to the other. We're hearing that they believe it's a virus. We heard the doctors talking at their ICP, or Incident Command Post, which is that carrier ship that's in the ocean. We hear that they believe it's a virus. And we find out in South Korea that, as opposed to Jerry seeing that it takes 12 seconds to show signs of the disease once the person's been bitten or attacked, the military, the SEALs at South Korea say no, they're thinking 5 to 10 minutes. And I discussed why that could be. If that was real life and we're trying to figure this out, we're going through all these clues, or what he calls crumbs, Dr. Fosbach, right? Then you could say, well, if it was like a rabies virus, that depends on where you're bitten. If I'm bitten in my hand versus my foot, I'm going to show symptoms quicker bitten in the hand versus my foot because it's closer to the brain. Okay. I also said it could be a sign that something's mutated. You know, that's a possibility too. We find out they're drawn to sound. Jerry gets a call from his wife and they come running, right? The ones that are close. And we find out again who's not affected or infected. We see Jerry talks to that CIA like double agent guy who's selling arms to North Korea. And he brings up about the fact that, which Jerry did not believe him, that they're pulling out teeth in North Korea and that's how no one's biting, the disease isn't spreading, but brings up Israel, which is Jerry ends up next. We also find out that who wasn't affected at this military camp when they had an issue with an immediate outbreak in a cell. Okay, I'm talking about like in a jail cell, was a SEAL who had a limp. That he said it was prior to this little incident, and none of them bit him. He's right in the middle of them, none of them bit him, and he wasn't infected. So, now we got another person who's not infected or affected. So now we're on chapters 9 through 12. We look at Jurgen's statement of all you can do is find a way to hide, which this does come back to us in the last chapter with something that Jerry does. We confirm absolutely attracted to noise, you know, as opposed to in South Korea, they were kind of close to Jerry, to his location, and therefore that could have tripped him off. Not this. They tried to throw themselves over the wall, over this fortified area of Israel. So it's sound, period, that tends to attract them. He, meaning Jerry, tests his 12-second theory on Sagan. She's bitten, right? She's bitten, look like just above the wrist. He quickly decides to amputate her arm above where the bite is and counts to 12. He's seeing if she's going to change. She doesn't. So he had to quickly decide and try that 12-second theory. We find out the weakness of airline travel, which proves theory's theory. There we go. Try to say those 2 times fast there. So theory's theory about airline travel. And so that's the UN secretaries that I'm trying to spit out. and his talk about the fact that airline travel is what made it spread. So we find out that, yeah, that's true. We see how easy it is because they had stowaways on the plane. And they were people that were infected, that were zombies that were infected with the virus. So, yes, we're seeing how easy it is to have it spread by airline travel. Who's not affected or infected? We had 2 people in this one. We have an elderly gentleman that they all run around in Israel. And then we have another situation that is, he's a young man, his head is shaved, he doesn't look well, and they all run around him like, and I've made this analogy, like the water around like a river around a rock. They all kind of go around him, but they don't bother with him, they don't infect him. So, and he looks sickly, so now we're up to 4 people that look like they could be ill, they're not well, and they had no interest in biting him. Okay? Now we're on to the last one. Last chapter here. So chapters 13 through 17. And we're going Jerry Lane's, it's not a cure, it's camouflage. So he's looking for some way to camouflage, to not necessarily cure it, but camouflage the people that are well. So it doesn't attract those, right, that are trying to eat them, essentially. So we find out that the virus needs a healthy host. If you notice, these are even getting longer statements than what they were for. We're learning specific things. We're learning more information. So the virus needs a healthy host. Okay? That's what we kept learning over and over and over again by who's affected and not infected, right? The pathogen cannot be injected or administered to the dead. You guys remember why? Remember why? Something to do with the heart and the veins, vessels. What's that called? Circulatory system. So we found out I can't give a virus or bacteria to these infected people because they're not technically alive. There's no circulatory system. So there's not way I can inject them with something and kill. They're not alive, so that's not going to work. We learned that the vaccinologist became infected by handling samples. So we discovered another way, which we kind of knew, but another way which they can be infected. Okay? We hear or see about dormancy. So when they don't have a stimulus of any kind, a stimulant of any kind, they kind of just stand there. They become dormant. They don't move around. They stay put, which ends up being helpful, right? If we're trying to figure out how to get around them, if we're using ourselves as camouflage like the end of the movie, we're putting something in our system that camouflages us, then we know they're dormant when there isn't a meal. So that's good to know. Jerry equals a human guinea pig. He ends up making himself a guinea pig to try to test his idea of turning himself or using some form of camouflage. We use a vaccine. I put kind of, because it's not really a vaccine. We're not injecting something with ourselves. A vaccine is injecting something or inoculating yourself with a portion of a pathogen so your body's able to recognize it and either lessen the symptoms of it or that can completely kill it, right, within our own body system. So it's not really a vaccine, but it's a hybridized meningitis strain with components of smallpox and H1N1. Camouflage. Okay, so this is what we've learned in this last segment. So we learned a heck of a lot. I mean, as you can see, right, we learned a tremendous amount, and this is just for the last few chapters. We learned a lot. If we sit down and go through, so when we're doing this in the future and we're looking at other public health flicks, or movies that we can turn into public health flicks, we're going to use the same format of looking and analyzing what would we pick up. If I was standing on, and it wasn't a set, okay, and I'm standing in any one of those chapters and I'm trying to figure out what's going on around me, I would be writing this stuff down. These are clues to help me determine what is this pathogen. What is this disease-causing agent that I'm trying to first find out what it is and second trying to kill it, right? So our last there of figuring out and talking about our symptoms. Now what? Well, now we're going to talk about our 3 things for laypersons and for professionals that we were able to get from these last chapters, these chapters 13 through 17. So from the 1 hour and 22 minute mark to the end of the movie. Okay, so our three themes are testing, and I'm talking about medical testing, vaccines, and public health. Okay, so public health directly relating to your community. So that's the three themes we're going to talk about today. So testing. Why am I bringing up testing? Well, because of this right here. Jerry equals human guinea pig. So I wanted to talk about, I thought since this is not something that's discussed frequently, yet it really affects all of us because all the medications we have that we take, they've been tested on someone or something. So it's really something that's worth talking about and have an understanding of what's involved with testing. You know, what happens with that, who oversees that, and so on. So what I can tell you is testing is as far as it goes for who mandates what's allowed. You know, the oversight is by the Office for Human Research Protections, or OHRP. And I'm going to read a statement that's from their website that talks about, you know, a little bit about what they do. But this is very involved, guys. I'm not going to go into, obviously, the whole crux of it. But I just want you to have an overview and understanding of what we're talking about here. Okay, about testing. And we're going to talk about animal testing, too, in just a moment. So the Office for Human Research Protections, or OHRP, provides leadership in the protection of the rights, welfare, and well-being of human subjects involved in research conducted or supported by the United States Department of Health and Human Services, or what you might know as HHS. Okay, OHRP, so that's the Office for Human Research Protections, is part of the Office of the Assistant Secretary of the Assistant Secretary for Health in the Office of the Secretary of HHS. So these are the ones that we're talking about the highest level here of, you know, that they would be the first-hand knowledge of getting information from legislators, maybe what direction we're going to go, what regulations that we are going to insist on, or from the AMA, the American Medical Association. There's a lot of professional organizations, legal issues that all filter into this. It's not like any one person says, oh, we're going to go after this and this we're not. And we're going to talk about that in just a moment too. So a lot of our direction of where we take medical testing on humans, I'm talking about just on humans right now, goes from the Belmont report. Okay, so I want you to see what this is. So this is just the first few pages of it. It's actually pretty interesting, you know, how the Belmont report, this is actually from the 70s. This was, lack of a better way of saying it, convention that was among health professionals who are trying to set a standard of what things do we think we should focus on when we talk about regulating standards for keeping people safe, protecting their information, not taking advantage of people. So they were focusing on certain aspects. So the Belmont report, it says on July 12, 1974, the National Research Act was signed into law, thereby creating the National Commission for the Protection of Human Subjects of Biomedical and Behavioral Research. One of the charges to the commission was to identify the basic ethical principles that should underlie the conduct of biomedical and behavioral research involving human subjects, and to develop guidelines which should be followed to assure that such research is conducted in accordance with those principles. In carrying out the above, the Commission was directed to consider. So these are the big things they were considering while making this Belmont report, okay, from this convention. 1, the boundaries between biomedical and behavioral research and accepted and routine practice of medicine. 2, the role of assessment of risk-benefit criteria in the determination of the appropriateness of the practice of medicine. Appropriateness of research involving human subjects, 3, appropriate guidelines for the selection of human subjects for participation in such research. And 4, the nature and definition of informed consent in various research settings. So that's the areas that they focused on. Those were the areas that they said, okay, this is what we're going to focus on for our time coming together. And if you pull this up, so these were the members of the commission, and in 2004 they actually had like a reunion of the people, and I'm going to, like I said, I'm post the links like I have before, so you guys can look this up. This is, you know, pretty interesting to see how it's governed against or for the protection of people when it comes to having human subjects. And human subjects aren't just like, some people kind of picture this thing of you're getting poked with needles, or, that you're having surgeries done. There are multiple types of research, and it can be as simple as observing people in an environment and how they react to certain stimulus in their natural environment, not, like a cheese in front of a mouse, but I'm talking about just observing them. There is a huge spectrum of what is considered research on people, and that's why it says behavioral, because it's not just the physical, okay? So, ethical principles and guidelines for research involving human subjects. Scientific research has produced substantial social benefits. It has also posed some troubling ethical questions, and I really wanted to make sure I hit on this, because this, I'm sure many of you, if not almost all of you, have heard of this, but something to bring up here. Public attention was drawn to these questions by reported abuses of human subjects in biomedical experiments, especially during the Second World War. During the Nuremberg war crime trials, the Nuremberg Code was drafted as a set of standards for judging physicians and scientists who had conducted biomedical experiments on concentration camp prisoners. This code became the prototype of many later codes intended to assure that research involving human subjects would be carried out in an ethical manner. So this is one of the standards they went by, was a Nuremberg Code. If you've read anything about the Nuremberg trials, they're horrendous. The things that went on in the concentration camps, the experiments that went on people were absolutely horrendous. And because of that, because of the people that were imprisoned and had horrible experiments done to them, some of the laws that we've created and ethical standards have come out of that, of what we are not allowed to do. And this is something that's still evolving today. It doesn't end with the Belmont Report, the Nuremberg Code. At no point we said, okay, we've learned enough and we're not going to evolve any point from here on out. And I'm going to discuss that in a minute. So the areas that it focused on was boundaries between practice and research, basic ethical principles, and applications. So the Belmont Report is really the gold standard today of what we consider acceptable and not acceptable. And at the end of this particular part of just talking about testing, I'm going to give you some examples of why it's important. But so if you're able to look up the Belmont Report, it's a really good thing to do. It's pretty good to keep yourself aware. As professionals, we should be aware of how these medical experiments are done. And whether when we're reading them, when we're reading these different case studies, or part of it should be critiquing how ethical it is. Because besides the obvious of what are we supporting if it's not ethical, besides that obvious, when ethical standards aren't met or kept, then you can question the validity, because you're questioning the validity of the scientists that performed it. You're questioning the validity of what they hope to attain. You're questioning the validity of whether they stuck to their protocols they put in place. So as a professional, with all the studies that you read, you should be looking up the Belmont Report, so you have an idea of what they're supposed to be abiding by. As a layperson, absolutely. How did your medication get approved? What did it mean to have a test subject? Being aware of this stuff's a good thing, and maybe you're going to be part of a study. And there are tons of them out there. There was just one that was advertised on mainstream news. I think it was CBS. That talked about a study on they want overweight people to be on an avocado diet, and they're willing to pay $300, and it's out of California. That's a study, and they have to show in their protocols of how, that they are protecting people's privacy. I mean, we think about something like that, and we're like, what is it? That's not really a study. It is, because as a participant, you still would not want your personal information to be violated or sent to someone else that you didn't agree for it to be sent to, or abused in a way. Maybe the information that you provided during the course of the study you would want to be given to third parties. That's the kind of stuff that is outlined in protocol and is protected and is your right as a subject of an experiment. And that's exactly what that is. Okay? So with animals, this is protected under the United States Department of Agriculture. Actually, for lack of a better way of saying it, inspects and tests and makes sure that medical facilities or whatever type of facility is using animals for testing that they are not unnecessary, that the animals are not having unnecessary pain, that they are kept humanely, they're taken care of, and it's specifically the Division of Animal Plant Health Inspection Service, or what's referred to as APHIS, that's under the USDA. That's who actually manages it. Now, what they're required to do, and I actually had to look, all I can remember is it's called IACUC. I had to know that for my boards when I sat for my boards as an LVT, as a licensed veterinary technologist. But if it's a place that uses animals, they have to have an IACUC, which is a committee, and IACUC is the Institutional Animal Care and Use Committee. And they're the ones that make sure that whoever's requesting the use of animals, that it is humane. You know, they're the ones making sure that it's humane, that the animals aren't being abused, that they're sticking to protocol, they're sticking to policy, and that there isn't some other form that could be used without using those animals. They're making sure, oh, wait a minute, you don't need to do this study over here, see, because this was done without the use of animal. They used some other form that didn't require the use of a living thing. So that's their job as an IACUC, okay, is to make sure that things are kept on a humane, ethical platform. Okay, so that would be at individual levels, at facilities, universities, you know, whoever's doing testing on animals. Okay, IACUC is a very important component of that. So I said I would bring up the fact that looking at it, that a couple examples of why it's important we have some sort of governing body, whether it's government, as animals, it'd be IACUC. If you've read the book, The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks, which is by Rebecca Skloot, to tell you, is a wonderfully phenomenal book. I loved it. It's sad because it's an example of why we need protection for people and the manipulation of, in this case, of cells. They called them HeLa cells, and he for Henrietta, Lacks, LA, that's where the HeLa cells. We actually still use cells from her today. And I believe it was around, 1940s or 1950s when her cells were taken. And this brings up the point of, are your cells always yours? And that's what the book brings up, about harvesting cells from people without their permission. And like I said, these laws, these guidelines, they're always evolving. It doesn't begin and end like, oh, well, there's a Nuremberg. Yep, there's the Belmont Report. Yep, and we have laws. No, this is constantly evolving, especially as technology is changing, as biomedical technology is changing. You know, the laws and the areas or people that govern them have to change too, because what we need to make sure is that people are not abused in the process, are manipulated or extorted, or something else happens as a result, exploited, as a result of trying to attain whatever they're trying to attain. So Henrietta Lacks, in the book The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks, is a really good example of why it's important, because her cells should have remained her cells. So if you haven't read that book, you should. I mean, it's a really good book, and it's a professional can read it as well as a layperson. So when I was in one of my classes through University of New England, there was an interesting, and I say study, but I say that rather loosely, about someone that it was a group of physicians decided to look at ways to cut down on infections that are specifically from intravenous catheters, so IV catheters, like that when you have fluids IV or other types of lines for depending on what you have, what you can do to cut down on infections. When you talk about things like nosocomial infections or infections that are acquired from like a healthcare setting, when you have a needle in someone, you increase the likelihood, or catheter, you increase the likelihood of that person developing an infection. This is just the double-edged sword of treating someone with an IV, or an IV form. Well, when I read it, I just could not believe what I was reading. And I was just kind of blown away about the fact that it was being called a study. Because the person ended up, in the end, I found out that he was fined by taken off the project, by university that he was working for, because he tried to say, oh, it's not really a study, it's a survey. And here it was so loose because he tried to say, yeah, see, I have a checklist here of what hospital personnel can do to reduce the likelihood of people getting an infection. But here's the problem. I'm reading this study, and he has multiple hospitals that had signed up, but they aren't on the same protocol. They can either drop it or continue it as they please. They were not routinely running any testing or culture to figure out if they have something, could it be from the IV? So there was nothing that confirmed it diagnostically. Okay, they were going by sight, by symptom, but not diagnostically. And I thought, this is crazy. Well, this is why you have, because who shut them down? It was the committee, it was the board through the university. So this is why I'm saying how important it is that we have these oversight. It's never going to be, and it never should be, something that we set these rules and it's done. No, it has to evolve with the research or the studies that are being done. It cannot be as like the laws are in a book, we wash our hands and we're okay now. So we have Henrietta Lacks that, the woman had cells harvested from her without her permission, and they've been replicating and using them for, more than 60 years now. All over the world, HeLa cells are used all over the world. And then we have a situation where he did not abide, a doctor and his team did not abide by the protocol set in place, and he tried to still act like it was a viable study, but it wasn't, and it was the board that shut him down. So these are the things that keep it safe. We watch this Hollywood movie and, Jerry injects himself and now we can create this vaccine. It's definitely not anywhere near that simple, and it shouldn't be, because when we have vaccines that we're using or medications that are new on the market that we're starting to use, or ones that have been around forever, they had to go through steps to get to that point, because it's trying to keep it as safe as it can for us. So this is going to evolve as long as our medicine keeps evolving. Okay, so as a layperson, you need to be aware of how these things are governed, and so that you're able to tell if something doesn't quite make sense. And I'll tell you what, I've been reading case studies before I even understood what the medical jargon was when I was a kid. And it does make a difference.